challenge people, fill their heads and let them go. So that's what we're going to do. So if I just tap that, this is my bio, and it's 96 it all started for me. I've done a lot of psychic training, a huge amount, and then I suddenly started to see into this other domain. I actually started by meeting a London group. These were normal people from London who'd all had encounters, they were contactees. I went out and we did work. This is the first thing. You do not sit at home watching videos. You do not, if you want to find out, you go out and you talk to members of the public. And the way this little talk is about, it's about what people report, not what is in the canon of conspiracy, but what people say has happened to them. So it's a very emotive topic, this reptoid one. It's not pleasant. So I met Gordon Crichton. He started ufology in 1941 in China during the Japanese occupation, and he saw a flying saucer then, and he was investigating from then. He ended up working underneath where the official or unofficial office was that studied UFOs in the 50s, and he was a very astute man. He was MI6, and he was a Cold War sort of expert on communism. So then, after working with him, I got involved with Flying Saucer Review that started in 1955, hence my love of 1950s ufology and 60s, where people met in church halls, Caxton Hall in London, all these lovely places, and people learned all about what was going on by interacting. So we cannot be passive. I'm an emissary from ufology in this. I know you're all different. You cannot be passive. You cannot just repeat what you've read in a book. You must talk to the public, you must talk to people, and you must ask the difficult questions. All right, so there's some musts. I don't think we can get away with that by just saying, oh, we'll read a few books and we'll know what's going on, or we'll read some websites. I got involved with Katrine, who's here today, who's a very important person, I think, in ufology and in paranormal, and that was the UFO Academy in 2010. So I've been involved with a London-based group, and then I got involved with one of the oldest ufologists in the world, and then I got the magazine from 2004, and then I started being involved in the UFO Academy, which I respect greatly. So here we are. These are the original flying saucer men, and they're very interesting people. There were flying saucer women, but unfortunately the pictures aren't there. So pioneered the study. This is Flying Saucer Review. It's a quarterly journal. Pioneered the study of translated cases from around the world. So the Anglosphere, our English-speaking world, is a tiny, tiny drop in what's going on. What Flying Saucer Review had was Gordon Crichton, who spoke 16 languages. And he used to work for the ministry, and he was an official translator of Russian and all these different countries' publications. So he would read their scientific publications, he'd read what they were thinking. And that meant we got to hear what the world was thinking, a lot of Latin America, which was hugely important as well. And that's what we call the case history. So when you've got information about an encounter, or a discussion, or any kind of contact, that's called a case history. If you don't write the data, you haven't got the information. You cannot write sketchy 3 lines, someone did this, they did that, that's not going to help. This is my background, nearly finished. Pioneer the art of collecting witness sketches and descriptions of entities. This is crucially important. This is dealing with a natural history and ecosystem. Pioneered the study of psychic and interdimensional nature of alien communication. This goes for all entities. It's all psychic, in my view. Anything that happens with these entities, you've got to be coherent. So I'm a contactee, but I don't talk much about it, and you won't have heard of me. You cannot be coherent unless you train your psychic ability. If something is above average intelligence, I'll call it a super intelligent being that is transdimensional, and it stands in front of you, you're going to pass out. That's simple. And nearly every case that's not involved will involve that person having a momentary discussion or momentary contact, and then their memory goes. So this is the key: training. Psychic training is not something that's well understood. The Russians did it, people understand behind the Iron Curtain. Certainly there's rumours about the UK being involved. I would suspect that Britain is leading the world, but we keep everything secret because we're always keeping everything secret. So I'm on to this, the UFO Academy, as I say, it's just now about to get a new venue, so it's very important. And it's an open forum where people say what they want to say without fear, and that was the thing that me and Katrine wanted. Katrine now runs it, I'm well out of it, but I have great respect. And this is the idea behind the UFO Academy. It relates to Plato, and in 387 BC, there was this park or garden dedicated to Athena, And people would walk around there, and anyone could walk up to Plato and ask him a question. Anyone can. And the old Greek idea is something called myotics, which is something that came out of the friendship case in Italy. You have to give birth to knowledge internally. You cannot be influenced by anyone else's thinking. It has to come from yourself. So that's why I'm trying to say 1950s, 60s ufology. You had to make your own mind up. There wasn't any internet, there wasn't any media, and people did it purely by discussion, which I believe in. So here we are, into reptoids. Now this guy came to me, I'm a practitioner, and he was a client. And he came in and he told me very quickly that he'd had an encounter with a reptoid in Watford, which is where I'm from. And strangely, because some people like these strange occurrences, it happens at the War Memorial in a cemetery in the centre of Watford. So it's 1994. These two men who are going out for a New Year's Eve party stop off to relieve themselves, and unfortunately they are weeing near the War Memorial, which is very naughty, and I don't agree with that. They were standing next to the War Memorial when they saw a low-flying bright light, and they thought, here comes a police helicopter. Unfortunately, they then suddenly found themselves on board a craft, and his friend, Henry's friend, who I don't remember the name of, was standing while a beautiful blonde woman, the most beautiful blonde woman he'd ever seen, was having relations with him. His friend seemed to be under a trance, so he wasn't voluntarily doing this. And then as the woman got up, she walked past Henry and she transformed into a green lizard, licking its lips with a big red tongue. And that was frightening beyond belief to a member of the public. So don't forget, this guy is not anything other than he's a labourer. He's a labourer, which is often the case. He's totally traumatised to this day. So I met him about 3 years ago. So he became hysterical. They then returned to Watford, and all the New Year's celebrations are over, so they got missing 4 or 5 hours. He's clearly suffering from PTSD, but he's open about it. So he tells everyone for the next 25 years, I met a reptile in Watford, and I was taken with my friend. Now the good thing is he's got a friend that was there and remembers it, but not the clarity he did. It's PTSD from a non-consensual sex act with reptoids. This is a warning. This is where we're going with this talk. I won't be graphic in obvious areas, but this brings us to an atrocity which was not well known. There's something called the Rhodesian Bush War, which is the Zimbabwean War of Independence, that went on from July 64 to December 79. And there's something called a stick of light infantry, so it's 8 men, dropped by helicopter to try and corner the rebels. This is like a bit like Predator. It reminded me a little bit of that. Cynthia Hind, again a remarkable researcher, died in about 2000. Superb, amazing woman. She looked into indigenous contacts. I mean, she's the main source. I've done some indigenous work, so I could say I'm a pioneer of it. When people go to Mongolia or they go to anywhere in Latin America or anywhere to find indigenous people, very important to get their views on what's happening or what they've encountered. So she did a lot of Africans, and she understood, because she was Zimbabwean, she spoke some of the languages. This is the kind of people that were around, some amazing people. So this chap's called David Brown. He's in the Rhodesian Light Infantry. This is between January and March 78. So they're not very good on dates because they were out in the bush. It's known as Fire Force. They were sent on a long-range patrol. Now what's interesting, he's sent on this patrol, and this gets into the reptoid kind of nastiness. He's sent where they're never sent before. They're a rapid reaction force, and they're sent on this long meandering patrol. And as they're walking along, they encounter rebels, and they're shot, some of them, and they're carrying this guy called Twigs. And then while they're struggling back in the dark to get to their pickup point, which is helicopter, very much like Vietnam, you get picked up, you're dropped as a patrol. They see this huge object, and it's sitting right on the top of the hill, and they all get frightened. So I'm just summarising it. So the Twigs, who was wounded, then thought, "What's this? Oh no, something else is happening." They didn't know what it was, but they all got a wave of fear. And then when he gets back, he's debriefed, which is interesting, by a major. So were they sent deliberately? I tend to suspect often that people are. They're sent deliberately, whether that was manipulated by reptoid minds or whatever, but they were sent there. This is the problem. They then go back, and this is a bad mistake. So this chap is there, he describes, I'm summarising, he stood up and was with his Bergens, he's got a huge pack, he's got a gun, and then a flash of light hits him, and as you can see, this is a genuine UFO photograph, and it looks elliptoid, but really it's a disc seen from an angle. Elliptoid, like eye shape, it's really a disc seen from an angle. Many people call things elliptoid, very few of them are. So this object flies away at speed. Now the problem is the flashback. So this is an entire event, and as I say, the psychic side of this is what happened to those guys, and it's an atrocity. So David starts getting flashbacks. He starts to see something that's happened, and he's approached by a dwarf when he's there with his Bergen when that flash of light happens, which could be, a flash of light could be 3 or 4 hours. And I'll just do a little aside. I was in Rendlesham when someone was taken in 1.5 seconds and had an entire encounter with burns on them and came back, and everything stopped, which is exactly what this guy described. So the first thing we look at, when we're dealing with entities, higher dimensional entities, time doesn't mean anything. And they can be in a bubble of gravity where time's running at different speed, and that's the key to it. So that he's approached by a dwarf in a cloak and a hood, probably some sort of grey. I could not see his face. He said he would take me into the forest where I'd be given something. He then led me away to the rest of the group, so they separated him, which is a bit sinister. He took me to a clearing where a ship was standing. My gaze was drawn to a man, his eyes locked, and some kind of power travelled between us, distorting our physical surroundings. So he's disturbing, like his mind, but also the surroundings. The next thing I record is an empty room. A woman walked in and told me, you should not be found here. And again, it's all sinister, people are frightened. Then he remembers this hospital ward. Now this is the key to it. We're getting reports about military abductions where there's reptiles, and this seems to be follow it. So the line of beds. In his line of beds is his colleagues and some other unknown people. Now, he knows this is bad. They're looking at each other, they're frightened. At the foot of every bed was a container of unknown substance with body parts of people stacked tightly inside, bloody and horrific. So this is nasty. There was a man who he knew, David, one of his crew, was standing there, and his double is standing behind him. So this is a classic kind of facsimile of somebody. I do a lot of cases, there's a lot of heritage cases in the Flying Saucer Review that are people meeting doppelgangers or even having the embarrassment of a doppelganger turning up at their work and not being them. And this man tried to say, oh, it's your brother, but they knew it wasn't. So this moment, this is when we get the description of the reptoid. So he recalls coming into conflict with a humanoid reptilian. It made it hurt him. It grabbed him by the throat, staring into his eyes and face, into his very soul. Its eyes were black and menacing. It was inside me, outside me at the same time. I felt great emptiness and coldness from it, emotionally. That's the lizard brain. So if you know about what a lizard brain is, there is just instinct, desire, need. There's no higher function there. I think they're capable of it, clearly, because they're technological. So this is Cynthia Hines' addition. She had run into a lady who'd woken up one night to see a reptoid getting into her bed. So again, it's not nice. If you're a woman and a lizard at 6 foot tall is getting into your bed, probably not a good thing. He was facing straight ahead as if unaware of the woman. She could only see one side of his face. He was clean shaven, but so it's often quite a human face. I think they probably create that with the lizard body. So I don't think that's a genuine face that he has. And he has a tail. There's red veins in his eyes, and he throws the bedclothes and prepares to climb into the bed as if she's not there. So this is like, who would do that? Who would get into bed, one of the most intimate things you have? You've got to think about what this means. These are people's reports, and Cynthia Hines was prolific. So David has very definite opinions of what happened. I've cut a lot of what happened out. But I've thought long and hard about my treatment at their hands. The first thing, though, is that I am alive and others are not. So that's clearly, he thinks those people were genuinely killed. Some of those people in those beds were not people that he was with. So he had some soldiers, he had some people with him. David is referring to the dismembered body parts in the transparent containers. They were most definitely dismembered. There is no question that I believe they were dismembered. I also think that this part of the story was not an indication of the killing of soldiers for their body parts, but some form of message to us that we have yet to interpret. And this is his description, a man who's had probably 10 years at that time when this was written. This was written in the mid-90s. He probably had maybe 15 years of encounters. My view is that they are manipulative. They will say or do whatever they have to in order to achieve their ends. They will stop at nothing. They will appear friendly and reassuring 1 minute, and the very next minute they are throwing some kind of liquid over my lower body which burns like acid, and they won't stop, no matter how much I plead with them. Only when they finish will they stop. So this is my commentary from the magazine. In the years following the incident, David had further abduction memories, and he met this beautiful being that gently and very carefully held his hand. David was afraid he would damage her in some way because she looked so fragile. So again, it's a contrast, isn't it? He's got this brutal being that's mind-thinging him, and then he has this beautiful, gentle being with like transparent, fragile hands just touching and holding his hand. That is the classic reptoid sort of duality. You get like manipulated. So the tone of these encounters kept changing between extremes. Above all else, David knew he was being mentally manipulated, tested to the limits of his psychological endurance. Some of his abduction memories suggested that these beings could make him live personally through the experience of physical dismemberment and then waken him unharmed. So they actually tear him apart. And that's why I haven't included too much in there, because you don't really need to hear it. Why would they inflict such misery like this on a human being? Is this a graphic example of alien inhumanity? I thought that was a clever phrase. Were they merely testing a soldier in the field, playing a mind-controlled terror scenario directly into his brain and analysing the gross stimulus effects? Yeah. Or was it an intervention aimed at modifying his awareness level? Or is this simply scientists more akin to Nazi doctors, which is a very important term I use? What are these people behaving like? Nazi doctors. There is no consideration of what happens. The frightening mind control exerted by these alien entities completely disarmed the other men. Don't forget, they're special forces. They didn't even fire a shot or consciously react or even recall the incident. This potential for our being influenced under blanket mind control may one day be our civilization's undoing, because we're behind. We're basically in an arms race of mind control, and we have nothing, and we have people not even discussing it. So there we go. David intimates that not everybody made it out from the first abduction. Were these brutal creatures harming those men and in that hospital? Will there ever be a Geneva Convention for such creatures? Was the entire experiment a scientific test without anyone being harmed? So this is somebody I met. So this is my reptoid. Now he is a model, he's not the person, but he's got the attitude and the clothes. So if you upset reptoids, they come looking. So I did one thing. I took a major reptoid contactee who doesn't ever want to be talked about. Took her over to the UK and spent a week learning about what reptoids were doing. This was in summer of 2012, and yeah, she was somebody who had, we call relations with a reptoid, and she was okay about it. And she felt that she was part reptoid, which I'm going on to. She explained her contact history, but never wants me to talk about it, which is fine, I respect that. So when walking, she was up at my place, I was walking through my local high street, when I saw a strange man in a long overcoat. It was a very hot day in May, and this man's looking at me from about, 30 yards away. He will not take his eyes off me, and he has a wide brim hat on a hot day and a big overcoat tucked in, and he's like that, and he's sort of very clumsily sort of walking along, and I knew straight away, because I had encounters, he was something else, and he wasn't human. He was seriously overdressed for a hot day. He looked angry. He kept unbroken eye contact, and as he was walking, he was shaking his head as he was looking at me. I lost track of him. I presume I ducked into a shot, but I don't have a conscious memory. But he was intimidating. He wasn't friendly. You can tell it's just a model. I mean, he's got nothing to do with the story, but he has that intensity and that sense that you cannot get away from his stare. So that's what the reptoid would do if there was one that didn't like you. That's it. So we're on to cases from the web. So I thought, let's just do some cases that people have talked about. Now this one is from Ireland, which is great. We like these. I don't know how many of these are well known or not. I just found them on the web. So he's listening to house music, early 2000s. He's driving home, which is the thing. I'm from Ireland myself. I mean, second generation, so I've done all this. And he sees this old woman coming into view. And she's very stooped. Now that's a reptoid posture. If you're a reptoid, you're going to keep yourself down, which is exactly what my guy was doing. Because they're very long in the trunk. So he stooped badly, and then she crossed and shuffled in the darkness. Now, in these quite remote places, they thought, what is she doing out here, especially an old lady? Almost immediately, they slowed right down, some speeding down to very slow pace. And time started to distort, so she's got a bubble around her. This is stuff, if you understand contact, there's a bubble around people when they're moving about in these non-human intelligences. And I've actually seen that with a UFO, where the UFO would stick, and then it would jump, and then it would stick, and then it would jump, and that is the kind of time distortion field called tempic field. The stooped old woman then comes to the wing mirror, which is a bit frightening, and you couldn't take your eyes off her. She comes and she's an outline at the window, which is classic kind of contact. Quite a few cases like this. I've seen quite a few where they come to your window. Looking down on her stooped form, she's looking, and then her head detaches and her face comes up to the guy. Now, that is quite frightening. What it is, I believe, it's the holographic image that she's using, just projecting forward. Her head's now like a snake, and it brings her face to face with this guy. It has green eyes glowed in the dark, vertically elongated black pupils, and scales in green. So this is a reptoid. The space where her nose should be was flat, her mouth opened wider and wider, and there's the teeth, sharp and protruded. More the wider she opened her mouth, and time resumed, and we continued our journey. Now this is interesting. This guy, obviously being Irish, has Australian links, like most of us, and American links, all the rest. There's a case that his brother hears about from Cairns, and it's exactly a guy ringing an Australian radio station. An old woman in the distance stooped over. She was standing alone in the dark in a cane field. So this is probably a guy out on a farm. He looked away for a second, and then he looked back at her, and the body remained where it had been, but her reptilian head was now face to face. So you imagine, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with beings that can change shape, they can change reality, they can change your mind. So this is a very strange case. Again, I don't know how well known it is, because I'm not aware what the consensus is. This is a lady who started her own question page on a site called Envision Service, and she says she was an artist and she hooked up with this psychic from Las Vegas. She's a well-known lady, and she actually names her. And she used to work from a casino. She'd do a show, a psychic show. And on a third visit, this was a private reading, the lady shape-shifted. She had felt something was different, so she's very perceptive, this artist. And she kept saying, "What are you?" And as if she could hear her. In the studio, the woman stood about 2 foot in front of me and slowly turned her head so I could see her in profile. Then she dropped her guise and went from an older middle-aged woman to a reptoid being. Her brow was much larger and protruding, her chin elongated, and her skin was made of grey-green scales. Her nose was pushed down and hooked. It was bald. She was bald except for a few strands of hair towards the back of her head. Her eyes became all black. Then she was stooped over as if that she was naturally much taller than her human form. You see this description again. So this is the giveaway. Someone walking up to you like that. That's the giveaway. They've got a huge trunk. They're wearing a holographic outfit, I think. She held it for long enough for me to take a good look and then turned back to face me in her human guise. This is her. So again, I'm not disrespecting the family, because she was a much loved person. I have my own theory on this, that this wasn't that lady, it was something pretending to be her. So I think she's a much loved psychic, and I'm definitely not going to malign her. I don't think that was her. I think this was somebody acting as her. The woman left soon, but I noticed she had a slight grin on her face. I never saw her again. Later I through curiosity found out that she died. Her name was Marlene Lombardi. So no offence to her family, I don't think it was her. I think it was an entity being her. When I finally started telling people about this, I noticed their strange behaviour. This is important. Many people got a trance-like blurriness over their eyes and seemed to listen to my info but not register it. So it's almost like there's a pre-program not to pick up on this. This zoning out might be fear, but I suspect it's some kind of mass programming that humans have endured, making us automatically block certain types of information. Now that I've researched these beings, it seems logical that the same methods they use to disguise their form could be used to hypothetically affect what we think, which I could ask one of them about this. So she worked from a casino called the Sunset Station Casino. I don't think it was her, a memorial page. I can't believe that was a reptoid. So, I mean, the psychic lady, I think that was somebody cross-linking into her life.
Channeling.
So here's from Cora. Have you witnessed a reptoid humanoid? Just checking my times. I realise that readers will assume I'm making this up. This is about bedroom visits, so this is where we're going to go with it now. Reptilian was staring into my eyes, trying to force me to stare into his. He was in my head. His face was just a few inches from mine. Imagine being immobile in some place that doesn't look like anything you can imagine. Completely helpless, with something in your face, in your mind. It's insanity. So they're basically tearing into your mind. Now, could I have some psychic training? It's not formal. I haven't been any military training. I've done that to people. I've blown people out of their seats and things. It's frightening. And you realise what you can do. And I'm just a human. So imagine what these things can do. I used to do experiments to see if I could influence people. I mean, it's very immoral, but I just thought, let's try. And it's something that I read about, which is again a bit immoral, looping. Looping was an entity that talked in Poland to someone about how they influence people. And they said, it's very simple, we loop you. And looping is actually just basically going into a high dimensional state and then ripping into someone and doing what you want with them. That's the demonic side of it. It's also possibly healers doing that without knowing. So don't forget, everything has balance. So if you're a healer and if you're a trance healer or somebody who can do amazing stuff with mediumship, that's what's happening. You're going into trans-dimensional states to break the laws and the rules. So we cannot reject this. We cannot reject it. So over the years, I decided that I wanted, if they wanted to harm me, they wouldn't have done so. They would have done so. I couldn't have stopped them. I found a paradigm of reality that allows me to get comfortable with what happened. I don't tell anyone except an extremely small circle of friends, my wife and my mother, who was an abductee. I thought that was interesting. Yet this was real and not human. It was respectful and fierce at the same time, and it knew my emotional state. The creature was sort of holographic and bluish-grey in appearance, and was able to fade in and out of visibility. Steam was rising from the being, and it also had some sort of dominance over my conscious mind. It made me go away and carry on as usual. Now this is Staff Sergeant Dennis, and he left his real name. And that's an entity that is doing, that's from something I'm involved with, that's a blue entity. So what it is, if you fade out of the trans-dimensional state, you go through this blue light, then you become smoky, and then you become solid. And this is why I'm trying to say to you guys, every single being does that. So the idea that reptoids come from some lower order space, total, in my view, misunderstanding of what trans-dimensional emergence is. Every being does that. It's nice to think they're lower than us, but they might be higher. We don't know. It's just they've made a choice of how to behave, just like we will when we get to that technology. We might do these things to other entities. We might be the persecutors. That's what you learn from history. I used to interview Holocaust survivors, and the key thing is every one of us is a monster if we want to be. No one is immune, and we need to learn that these things have chosen to be monsters, but they, we'll go with it. So this guy is called Philip. Oh God, it's a Latin name. I can't do Dennis, and he's obviously a military guy, so it gets us towards the military side of it, and. It was not human, it was respectful and fierce at the same time. Now, this is a case of a pregnant, I think it's a pregnant woman being affected. Okay, pregnant woman being affected. Now this is, I deal a lot with pregnancy and alien interaction. And again, people who researches this stuff, I read up on it. And they do target pregnant women, which isn't very nice. Who's the most vulnerable people? The unborn. How brutal would you have to be to go after a pregnant woman if you were an entity and start manipulating her? One night I was woken to find what I can only describe as a reptile-like creature standing over me on two legs. It had a frill around his neck, I've not heard of this before, that was threatened like an extension, very muscular and tall. He was making a hissing noise. I felt that I was certainly not, it was not friendly, and almost threw me when our eyes met. As previous experiences, I was not able to move or speak and felt paralysed yet wide awake. In absolute terror, I shut my eyes and opened, and it was gone. I was beside myself and was in fear of his return. It wasn't the last time I awoke to him. He also came to me in a dream, and this is important. In my dream, I was sitting at a friend's square table talking with her, and I knew he was there. In my dream, I remember as my friend was talking, I was being coaxed away and taken by him. I felt like an out-of-body experience, as I could see myself in my dream at the table with her. I knew I was being taken. I managed with all my spirit to fight the strength he had on me, and I remember feeling like I wasn't ready to go, and that he'd be back when I was. So this is that experience of being dragged, being pulled, and you can resist it. It's this higher power that we all have, but who's trained in that? So we get clergy. I talk to people who've had these experiences. They go to clergymen. I've got interviews with a Kikuyu lady, and she went to her pastor, and he said, "You're not praying hard enough." And then people go to I deal a lot with Muslims, so I work with the Muslim community, and they tell me about their jinn experiences, and they're very similar to these. And they're told, you're not holy enough, you're not praying enough. This is what they're told. And it's like, because the prayer works on occasion, but it is actually your higher power that has to link into it. And if you're not trained and no one's ever taught you, what do? So they have a passage of the Quran that they say to banish jinn. But that's all very well if it works, but what happens if it doesn't? So I've met, I was in a room with 3 Muslim ladies who'd all had jinn experiences. One had woken up with a jinn, which was a being, crouching on her hips. And he was feeding on her pretty much. And she, these are telling, these don't cross into our community awareness, because they're like, all the jinn stuff stays with the Muslim community. They don't talk about it, they're not to share it. So we need to know what's going on. The same with indigenous peoples. They're uncontaminated to some degree in my modern life. So let's go for these last ones. So I woke one night, a state which I only explain as a spasm. My body was in a rigid state. I could not move a muscle and felt like something was on top of me. I thought to get movement back. I turned my head and I was just having to fight control on my body. I felt dirty and touched. It was horrible, feeling from deep inside me. I could barely move my toes, again, very slightly, so she's getting her movement back. I was using all my might to break free. I feel like something breathing in my left ear, a sound of growling, a noise right next to my ear. And I could barely see the outline of a head, a big long head next to my own face. As the spasm-like feeling started to wear off, a tiny bit of time, I could work out that this thing was on top of me, looking like a lizard or a newt. It was like blending together of all that was around it, or maybe invisible. So there we are. So this was, I felt violated and used, so that gives a summary. The next thing it was quickly off me and standing, this is very important how it leaves the room, the trans-dimensional. A light came through the gap in the curtains, there were different shades of golden light, and also very small particles like dust or small stars. This reptilian creature was 6 foot tall. I could sense it was either proud, now think of that, and happy with itself. I tried to sit up, and the creature walked forward into the light beam. As it did, the feet and legs vanished into the light. The more the creature moved towards the window, the more of it vanished. After it was gone, I felt relaxed. I felt I was raped by this horrendous monster. I'm sorry, that alarm point's the last piece. Reptoid cases are immoral and somewhat sadistic. There is amnesia and mind control. There is shape-shifting and deception. Reptoids do not attempt dialogue or meaningful communication. There is disregard for any civilized contact. Some human reptoid contactees have reptoid traits in their character, usually personal magnetism, intensity, hypersexuality. Are they imbued with reptoid traits during abduction? Are these healthy? So I know people who are close to reptoids. They're human, but they are influenced, and they do take on the traits. So this is another type of contamination, isn't it? So reptoids violate the mind with psychic attacks during abduction. They violate the body with sexual assault. They may be energetically feeding off. They readily show anger. Again, not many entities do. Reptoids do. They show anger. These cases were showing anger. We have no means of detection of these creatures. They are emerging from a trans-dimensional source we haven't modelled for yet. It's outside our sphere of awareness. There is a higher power defence, but it requires strong resolve. There is little knowledge of methods of containment. We have no idea of the agenda or their capacity to interfere in our development. Do they empower negative humans? That's the big debate, which I haven't really touched. Do they deceive people in power? So are those people in power under their control? Are they willfully under control? Or are they being deceived? What are these creatures doing? Are they lower order beings? How do we triumph over them? How do we eliminate their influence in the long term? And we have to evolve. And that means asking the right questions, which brings me back to 1950s ufology. It's nice talking to you, and good night.